Okay, so yeah, I guess the first thing on the agenda today, it was just brought up a moment ago, is the quizzes from chapter 2 and 3. I have no idea what happened on those. Everything seemed to be in order, but for some reason on several of the questions, it just didn't load the answers. Well, for 2 and 3, it was doing that weird thing where it wasn't showing the answers. And then on chapter 3, the submit button wasn't working. So if you haven't taken that yet, on the chapter 3 quiz, you basically have to wait for it to time out. And I have no idea what's going on in that, especially because I couldn't even look into things because the submit button's not something I have any control over. Whenever I create a quiz, there's a submit button there and it does its own thing. So I'm not really sure what had happened there. Isaac.
Hey, I have a question on one of the questions on the quiz.
Yeah.
I got it wrong. It said the ID tag. Is that not hashtag? Because isn't dot like a class and
yes.
hashtag the ID? So I got that wrong, but I was pretty sure it was correct.
Okay. Yeah, I always double check them. Those quizzes come from the publisher. So it's actually in a markup language. It's typically in XML, which is a markup language. So it has all the tags and stuff, and they'll have question tags and answer tags. So typos tend to show up in there sometimes. So I always go back over the quizzes. But as far as those last 2, chapter 2 and 3, with the way those were messing up, I was just going to go back and put the full points on for everybody that took the quiz.
Okay.
So yeah, take note of the questions because obviously that's the stuff we're supposed to be learning from that section. But you are correct, Chelsea. If it's the IDs will be a hashtag, and the classes are the dots, and those are usually big things. So typos tend to creep in. That's why I always double check them anyway. Anytime there's a quiz in my classes, I go back over them because, typos, and then sometimes I just don't agree with the answers at all, especially if the question's kind of vague. Whenever they ask vague questions, I almost always end up giving the points back on them, as long as I can see where you got to the answer you selected. Let's see, so there's that. Another question that showed up had to do with uploading multiple assignments and things to the domain host. So I wanted to go over that real quick and just kind of make sure everybody was clear about what to do on that. This will do that. I'll go ahead and share my screen and kind of go through that. I had kind of anticipated some questions on it, and then after I heard from 2 or 3 people that were a little confused on what to do, I was like, I'll just make sure that's on the to-do list for Monday. I'll eventually go over it once the internet catches up. Has everybody been able to at least create the domain site?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so, but I didn't sit down and grade them all at once, but just whenever people would turn them in, I'd go through and check that assignment. So whenever you have your account, you should be seeing something like this. Has the domain you set up for the class, you'll just want to go in there. And then into the file manager. You can also get to the file manager from the control panel, but the big orange button will take you right in there. And so it goes to the top level, and on Apache servers, there's several files here that have that are for the server to use, not for humans to use. Like you'll notice these 2 files at the top level, the .htaccess and .override. Those only have an extension. they don't actually have a name on the file. So those are for server use. So that's why you don't want to upload files to that level. So in the folder called htdocs, that's where everything goes. And right off the bat, there's that index page. And I believe that first day we kind of went over replacing that with your own index page. As long as it's called index, as long as there's a file called index, that's what the computer will open if you type in that domain. Notice if I go to that domain and then to open a file, I could, well, the only one there is the index2.html. So if I actually type the file name in, it loads the same page. Basically, index is the page that you don't have to put a name on. And to keep everything organized, because the homework every week is kind of that same website. It's that yoga class, passive light yoga site that we'll be working on the whole semester. So every week we'll go over some new content and add that into the site. So you'll want to, well, on your computer, you're just going to make a copy of last week's assignment and then do the updates. And when you upload them, you just want to put them in new folders. So the button down here at the bottom looks like a big plus sign. You use that to create new folders. I'll go ahead and create a couple of them here. I'll just call one of them like mod 1 and a new folder, mod 2 for module 2. And I guess we can see something. I should probably put a file in there. So right off the bat, there's nothing there, but you can upload the files, or from the upload button, you'll notice you can upload an entire folder at once. So if you keep them organized on your computer and have like chapter 2 homework, chapter 3 homework, chapter 7, chapter 8, whichever ones, you can just upload the entire folder at once. Just to be quicker, I'm just going to create a couple new files. And on one of them, I'll call it index. Which folder am I in? I didn't pay attention to what folder I was in. I'm going to have to check that. Here's the index page. I'm just going to put some words on there. Basic text will show, but there's no control over it. So I'm going to skip the HTML because the point of this is just showing where the files go. Save that. And okay, that was the mod 1 folder. So in the other folder, I'll stick a file here just so we can see the difference. I don't know, I'll call it mypage.html. Something other than index. Actually, since this is the only one on there, it would probably still find this. But usually it's just the word index is the only one we can count on it finding. Here's a second file. Just some random words on there. Oh, there's something in the chat room. I was wanting them as 2 separate assignments. So like the chapter 2 assignment and then the chapter 3, there wasn't any changes on that, was it? Like you said there, Isaac, it's just, it was the HTML in chapter 2 and then only the CSS in chapter 3, if I'm remembering correctly.
I'm sorry. Having done this, chapter 2, you didn't have a style sheet. Then you copied the stuff over to chapter 3, the 2 files. But you had to make a style sheet, but then you had to edit your other files to take out the information that was now in the style sheet.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so basically, so
I'll go over it. If you turned it in that way and overwrote chapter 2 stuff with the chapter 3 submission,
well,
I'll go through it. If I have any questions, I'll let you know.
Well, I know in mine, I made them in separate folders, and I gave you a separate link to it. Because like you said, separate folders. So basically I had the one that was yoga and the other is yoga CSS. And then they said to make the next one yoga chapter, yoga 4 or some dumb thing. So you just make a separate folder for each. for each week's assignment, like the
Yeah,
book says.
that's what's preferred. So like Joe was saying, or just make a folder for chapter 1 and a folder for chapter 2, and then the top level index file, maybe make a table of contents that just has hyperlinks going into each one, just to keep it organized. That's just a suggestion. And then each week, so now to get to those, well, if we go back over to the domain site, I guess I have that open here. Like I was saying earlier, if we just type that in, it's going to open that index page. So we just have to put the rest of the link in there. So /mod1 opens the index page from that. And mod 2, it's named something different, but it'll probably still find it. Oh, no. So there was no file called index here, so it didn't know what to open. It kind of gave this generic thing. Normally, you'll see it's just like the directory path you would type in on your regular machine. You have that top level domain, which is kind of like, essentially you could think of it almost as the drive that you're putting it on. The hard drive on the server, just a partition on the hard drive on the server. Then a slash to get into the folder you want, and another slash to get to the file name. What I call that, my page. And at that point, you have to type that in. And then the link, once you pull up the page and check and make sure it works, everything okay, then you'll just select that. If you didn't know, if you push Alt-D, D as in dog, if you push Alt-D in pretty much every browser, that will automatically highlight whatever's in the address bar. So that's the quickest way to copy and paste that URL. So then the URL right to the home page each week with each chapter's assignment is what will get turned in. Does that make sense to everybody that had a couple questions about it?
Yes.
So it's a lot like the way we set up files and folders and all that stuff on our computer. Just it regularly confuses people because they expect it to be. I think it has to do more with expectations. Right? We expect the server to be drastically different than what we do on the computer, but they're very similar. There's a lot of overlap and stuff.
I wasn't sure how I was supposed to do that, so I ended up making my homepage index link to the folders.
That works. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. So there's like a big table of the index page just has a link going in.
Yeah.
That's a really nice organized way to do it. But as long as you can get the link to me somehow so that I can click my way through and see the files, then once I'll look at them there on the website and then open up the code and check all that. Let me open something because the next thing on my list, I need something opened. There's probably something from last week still. Okay, yeah, here's the one from last week. If I just open this, and another thing that y'all have probably seen by now is the way that the cache on the browser will sometimes try to remember stuff, right? It helps with transmissions, right? Whenever we say go to some page, like Ivy Learn, that's a page we go to a lot. Whenever we put that in the address bar, the browser's immediately going to be like, okay, I've been to that page before. I know what it looks like, and it's going to try to open it from the cache instead of immediately checking what's being transmitted. And that's fine on sites that are finished, right? But when we're putting together the CSS, if it does that and we don't see the changes, that can be a bit of a problem. So a lot of times, just double clicking the refresh button will work. But a better way is to do a hard reload. So if you hit F12 to pull up all the debugging tools, whenever that's open, if you hold down on the refresh button, so like click a long click on the refresh button, so more than 1 second, you'll get some options where you can just reload the page, or a hard reload makes sure it tells it to check the file. But sometimes you might have to actually empty the cache for that page and reload. So as we get further and further along, a lot of times you're going to have the debugging tools open anyway. So all you have to do is just hold down on the refresh button, and then you'll have some options on how to empty the cache. I guess another alternative is you can always go over to the history somewhere. Yeah. If you just go in history and clear browsing data from like the last hour is probably good. If you're sitting there working on working on your homework, putting the thing together, and it's not wanting to do that, there we go. Yeah. Usually, if you're sitting there working on the page, your homework, the last hour, the last 24 hours will be enough to clear the cache for the site you're working on. But if you, as we progress, you're going to have the debugging tools open. So the quickest way is just to do a long click on the refresh button. Just wanted to make sure and show that. Any questions about those? All that kind of making sense? And again, yeah, as we do it more and more, you'll get used to it very, very quickly. So the next thing, I guess the next thing to go over has to do with making our sites look a little bit better. Some of the small touches that we can put in there. The first one was something I had in the lecture notes from last week. I'll go ahead and throw that together today. I guess I could keep sharing my screen. Well, we'll get to that in a second. So, well, the way my chalkboard looks right now is kind of a good example of this. Right? There's not really solid colors in the real world. Right? The sleeve of my shirt, we could use a color, we could have the computer use a color picker and determine what color that is and everything. And it would give us something that's a pretty close match to the spot we checked, right? There's not exactly an even flat color with no distinguishments between it. So that's something I like to kind of adjust for, because whenever what we were seeing last week, we'd tell the computer to make the background like blue or something, and then it would make it that bright blue, computer screen blue, which doesn't really match the real world. There's usually slight variances. So one thing we can do is apply gradients. Everybody's familiar with gradients, right? Usually we see them as going from one color to another. But for the most part here, I was thinking more of a subtle thing. That should be a lowercase l. So actually, I shouldn't start on that. With the background image property, so there in our CSS, we can do a background dash image. And that one does get that one's confused me a few times over the years, because we think of even when we're talking about gradients, we're thinking of just a solid color. So it's really easy to try to put it to a background color, but it's going to be the background image property. One of the values we can assign to that is a pre-built function called linear gradient. And it's a pre-built function, so then we need to pass some things in, which the first thing is the direction it goes in. I kind of ran out of room here. And then a comma, and then we'll start saying what colors we want to put in and how far they go. So like, this would all go in one line. I just kind of ran out of room here, sorry. So we'd have like color 1 goes 30% across the screen, or then color 2, and however many colors we want to apply in that gradient we'll just keep adding colors in and it'll shift slowly between them. We'll see it here in just a second. We also have radial gradient, which like starts in the middle and goes outward. Let's look at them on a page real quick. So it might make more sense to see them. And I'll start with some extreme ones. So I'm going to go ahead and start an example here. Guess don't need to munch on it. So this stuff we've seen before a few times. All the things that have to be there, the doc type, HTML tag. I'll put in a head, because that has to be there. And the body tag. And for right now, I'm just going to put random words. I'm talking about the background color, so really I just have to have some random words. So there is a background involved, but we're going to be looking at the background color. So I'm save this. I'll create a new folder for today's stuff. Class 1, 2, and class 4 now. And I'm just going to call it class4.html because I'm not really feeling very creative with names right now. But just sort of the most basic sort of HTML page, and really not much to that one. I'll go ahead and do that. And open up a browser so we can see it. Things we've seen before, right? Type up some basic starting HTML code. Go to this file, wherever I saved it at. Again, here you go. And get those just basic words, and then we can start styling that and apply colors. We saw that last week with CSS sheet. I'll make a new style sheet. Well, I'll just do this on the body tag. So in the body, well, I'll start with a background color to kind of express this point. Background color, maybe blue. That's probably not going to look very good, but class4.css. And then, just like we saw last week and in your homework, we have to connect to that. Everybody remember what tag do we have to use to connect to the CSS sheet?
Link.
So we need a link tag, and we have to tell it the relevance of the link we're creating, which is a style sheet, which follows the same patterns we've seen before, right? The name of our tag, an attribute, something about that tag that we're filling in, and that's going to be assigned some value as a string, so in quotation marks. Then we also need a hyperlink reference to tell it where to look. So in the same folder, and just so we don't have to put a directory path, we can just give the name of the other file. And then close that tag. So now it should have a blue background, which it turned that background blue, right? But a very unnatural blue, the computer screen blue, where it's a nice even distribution, and even distributions of colors don't really exist in the real world. So linear gradients can be very useful for that. And a gradient, this is a mistake I've made a few times, is it seems like a color, but a gradient does count as an image. Whoops, I can spell that correctly. So we set a background image, And then instead of putting just a color there, we want to actually pass in the instruction to make it a linear gradient. And then we'll throw in a bunch of stuff in parentheses describing how that gradient's supposed to go. So the first part is the direction. What angle does it go off at? So like, we'll put in some angle, and then you have to type DEG, short for degrees. So we're going to shuffle this to 23 degrees, and then we can put in a couple colors like blue and then green. Does that make sense? So that's the simplest case one there. So that one, look, it kind of split it up into paragraph sizes. This is why I always put that tag at the top that says the minimum height of 100%. Make sure it fills up the whole screen every time, because the background was only big enough. There's only one paragraph of words on there. So that's all it tried to do as the background. But you can see it starts over here at blue and just kind of fades over to green. Good for extreme effects. And then we can put some numbers in here. So like, we put a 10% right there. So blue, 10%, then green. Whoops, I think I put an extra comment. I put that in the wrong spot. Save, reload. And yeah, sort of the trial and error thing, maybe 10%. Well, I'm drawing a blank on where I put that number at. Color space percent, yeah. It should be blue space some percent, like 10%, something like that. There we go. So blue, 10%, and then that's where it kind of fades out. So if I take that number out, so we can see the difference. So it's showing sort of an even mix. It tries to get an even mix. If I put 10% over here by the green, you know, that's where it starts. So it starts at blue and then saying be it green by 10% into the thing. So if I change that to like, I don't know, 40%, whoops, 40% or 0.4. Personally, I like to use the percent sign. So that's saying be it green by 40% across the page. And a radial gradient is very similar. I guess what changes is we actually say radial, and then instead of degrees, we put the word circle here. So it like fades out from the center. Let me take that percent. The percent does the same thing. So it'll be at that, by that percent. So there's just the default one. So in the middle, it's blue, and then it goes outward and fades out to green. Which, for extreme cases like that, I started with that just to kind of show it. Because normally what I would use for something like this isn't necessarily an extreme thing like going from blue to green. So I'll put in something like 115 degrees. And I'm just going to pick some random colors. So maybe a whole lot of red. And I don't know, B9, quite a bit of green, and just a little bit of blue. So 67. So something that's a whole lot of red, a whole lot of green, and just a little bit of blue. kind of like the colors we were looking at the other day, and then just slightly fade that on the gradient. So then, I don't know, maybe like D1, D9, 6, 8. So that it's very, very close to what the original color was, but it's not a completely flat color. That might have been too little of a change, and maybe, let's see if that one shows up more. Yeah, so a very subtle effect, if I change, so like one letter here, if you're watching when I hit the reload button, you see there's a slight change. It's still, at a glance, it still looks like one color, but I always feel like that makes it feel a little bit more natural, where there's just like a slight transition so that it's not completely flat. Like that one I pointed out earlier, the color on my sleeve, the color of the sleeve on my hoodie here. I could take a picture of this and open it up in some paint program and use the eyedropper thing to get the color number, copy and paste that in, but it still wouldn't look exactly like the sleeve of the shirt because the real world doesn't have the completely flat, identical colors everywhere. There's going to be some slight change. So that's where I like to use linear and radial gradients for just a slight change, but they can also be used to great effect as well, right? If I take this down to like a 7, take the red out of that, it's probably going to fade from brown to green. Yeah, so they can go from a big effect to a slight effect, and I almost never use a solid color. I try to use gradients to make it look not so screen-like, more of a natural color thing to it. And again, like always, you'll just want to play around with that. And well, you saw me type a name in, and then here I use that one. So I use hex color. So let's throw in another one. So maybe like HSLA. We saw that the other day. Use saturation and lightness. So what's the numbers? 98, 12%, 45%, 87%. Oh, and with your text editor, you're also going to want to watch this. There's parentheses inside the parentheses. You always have to make sure you close the right number of parentheses when you're doing things. You can see it still applies. So we can mix and match any of the color things we saw last week. We can put inside of the gradients. And then we can keep adding colors. So maybe after that, go to a yellow. And then an RGB of 122, 122, 122. It's equal amounts, red, green, and blue will produce a gray. So that's going to be some sort of gray color. And yeah, you'll just want to play around with it and kind of get it, see what works. But my biggest recommendation is doing that for like the subtle changes so that it's not a completely flat color. And then we can change where each one kicks in. So maybe we want that second color kicking in at, I don't know, 22% of the way across the screen. Then that yellow isn't going to actually kick in until, I don't know, 67% of the way across the screen. And so in those percents to say where each one comes in or goes out, 71%. Yeah, if you don't put any numbers in there, it's going to try to make them even. And as you adjust those numbers, remember that's where it starts at. Do I have anything else on those? Oh, yeah, so I just want to kind of mess around with those a little and kind of get a feel for them and see what see what you think looks good on them. But we either have a linear gradient where
Could you show us a little bit about that first percentage you put in? How changing that percentage makes it look different? The 23 degrees versus 115 versus blah, blah, blah.
Oh, okay. So right now it's at
Can you show that real quick? Yeah, right. Now,
so right now it's at 115 degrees. So if I change back to like maybe 12 degrees, a very shallow angle, and when I hit reload, see how now it's a shallow angle kind of going that way. Might as well start at 0 degrees.
Yeah, show that.
0 degrees is going up.
Right.
So there's our first color, and there's that gray at the end.
Okay,
and,
so hang on a sec. So 0 degree is horizontal bars. 0 degree equal horizontal bars.
Going up. So the first color's at the bottom, and the last color's at the top.
Bottom to top.
Then 90 degrees, you can see goes from left to right.
Left to right.
And just kind of going around the circle here. So the next quarter of the way around the circle is 180 degrees. You can see here now the brown's at the top,
horizontal,
the gray's at the bottom.
Top to bottom.
Yep.
And
then
270.
the next 90 degrees, yeah, you can probably already guess what that's going to be.
Going to be right to left.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, all the stuff in between those 90 degree ones are just slowly turning around to that point. Make sense, Joe?
So if we had a program, well, that'd be interesting. If you had a program that did that and had it go through the whole clock face slowly, it would just evolve.
Yes. We won't see that for a couple weeks because making CSS dynamic, we have to is going to be a minute. There's some other stuff we have to do before we can start getting dynamic with the CSS.
Oh, so that's how you'd have.
I will make a note to come back and do that.
That's dynamics. That's one way of doing dynamic CSS is to, which means we So does that mean we actually put a little program in? Sort of.
So a lot of people will make the CSS dynamic by using JavaScript and just having JavaScript control the CSS just like it does the HTML page. But any dynamics we can get from CSS are more efficient. So we'll see those before long. So when we can do things in CSS, it works. It's a lot better than doing it in the JavaScript. Plus, some people might disable JavaScript and cookies and things on their computer. So anything you put in your client-side scripting might not work at all if the user disabled all that in the browser. So come back and see.
So theoretically, if I had something that had different colors in it, so like depending on how I do that, then I might want to do something with my color of my text. Like your random words wouldn't look too bad like it is on a lighter background, but we get into the darker greens and the grays, that's better as a lighter color.
That's something, that's the next thing we're getting ready to get into. And I had a couple tips I was going to share with you about those things. Any questions about that? We'll come back and look at linear gradients when we get to animations and things. Animations and counters and stuff like that. So that way, like Joe pointed out, we can change our gradient. Because then, like that thing I mentioned of doing very subtle changes. So it's just not a completely flat color. You can make that look really, really nice by doing that. And it looks kind of like waving cloth, just by subtly changing the angle that the gradient's at. There's a lot that can be done. Let me see if I can pull these up real quick while I'm sharing the screen, which right now we're still looking at the basic getting started. Let's see if I can find a couple here. I think those were all reference sites that it pulled up. Here we go. So there's a number of sites like this, but the images that are made entirely with CSS. So they probably typed the text in HTML and just did the rest of that all with CSS. Picture of the Doctor Who box, drawn completely CSS. And drawing pictures. And some Star Wars characters. Oh, those look okay. Yeah, there are some much better ones than this. Let's see if I can find some other ones. Yeah, maybe y'all can just go to Google and look for images drawn with CSS, created with CSS, and there's some just amazing things. Somebody drew like Simpsons characters and animated them and have a whole, not a whole episode, but like recreated scenes drawn completely in CSS. Maybe I can find the playing card. Yeah, so these pictures of the playing cards there at the bottom of the screen, those were drawn entirely in CSS. And those don't even have the face cards. There's not, yeah, if y'all go looking around for that, you can probably come up with some, or come see the pictures. There's some really amazing things artists have done, like actually draw full images with CSS, because that's what it's for. It's for setting up colors and layouts and things on the screen. I'll look around and see if I can find some of the links that I was wanting to pull up, because there's really some quite stunning stuff. But I guess that leads into the next part. So we saw those, last week we looked at colors and fonts, still mostly dealing with words. And with gradients there, it can make it look a whole lot better, but it's still pretty much just messing with the colors. There's a lot of little things we can do to add flair to the site. Like borders around it, put in shadow images, things like that. And to start with here, I wanted to take a look at some things about images. So we saw briefly that we could use an image tag. We'd set the source to whatever the picture is. So like pic.jpg, whatever it's called. And we can put a width and a height attribute there. So like width equals 200 and height equals 100. I almost never do that personally. I try to always size the image, get the image to the size that I need. And I'm not alone like that. A lot of people would do that. They'd instead of typing that manually and having the computer change the size, we can also adjust those in CSS, but there's some restrictions there. The book talks about that. A lot of developers prefer to just use the size image you want to begin with, and that way you don't have to go changing it dynamically at runtime, because then there's different questions, right? How do we size it if it's going to change dynamically? Because people have different size screens, and do we base it off the size of screen they're looking at it on? Use a set number of pixels, compare it to the text somehow? What's the best way to size it? So usually, instead of resizing it, we set up an image that's the size we want. And with HTML5, this is the traditional way to do it. We just have that one image tag. They added in another element that we can use to hold lots of image tags. And that's going to be a picture element. And then inside of the picture element, we'll say what the options are. So we'll put in some source tags and then give it what we call a media query. We'll see these repeatedly, but ask for a certain size. So like media equals, I don't know, a min width of 400 pixels. So if the screen, all this sizing and things sets us up so that it's bigger than 400 pixels, we'll use a particular source. I'm running out of room. We're going to see this in an example here in just a second. And then we can put multiple source tags there. So then we'll have another source tag pointing at a different picture that is slightly smaller, or if we have less than 400 pixels of room, things like that. Probably make more sense if we look at it in see it in the example. So I'm going to grab some picture off the internet just to use instead of drawing one this time. So first off, I'm going to get rid of this CSS from earlier. We'll redo all that stuff in a moment. So on a cold day like this, I'm just going to pull up an image of the beach. That sounds really nice. Much nicer than a snowy day in Clarksville here. Something like this. That looks like a good one to use. So yeah, just kind of a random picture to use. And might as well take note of the original size. It's 331 by 280. Actually, I want something bigger than that to start with. The bigger ones here. Yeah, so here's a nice big one. Notice that the original size is 2120 by 1414. I'll go ahead and save this. And to avoid getting into the addresses, we're going to talk about that very soon. Once again, I'm just going to put it in the same folder as the HTML files. And I'll call this beach.jpg. So just a random picture to use. I guess I'll start here with what we saw before. We saw the traditional image tag, IMG. We can put in a source, which is in the same folder, have that file called beach, and it's a JPEG file. That'll work, and then that'll load that in at the size it's at. So it's a great big image. It throws the whole thing up there on the screen, which You can see scroll bars already appeared, so it takes up more than way too big of a picture. So one of the traditional ways to do this was adjusting the height and the width. So we have those attributes. So we can set, I spell that wrong?
All right.
Height equals, I don't know, maybe I'll make it 400 pixels tall and 300 pixels wide.
Oops. That can be really foreshortened.
But so it fits on the page now, but it's a static size, right? It can't really be changed. And the aspect ratio is done completely off here. I think it was originally wider than it was tall. So making it fit threw all that off. So typically what I've always done, and is a very common thing, would be to adjust the size of the picture, right? Open that up in something we can adjust the size of. I have some much better ones on my computer, but I don't know what software y'all might have, so I'm going to go with Open Microsoft Paint. Most people have that on their computer, and we can resize stuff there. There's much better things where we could just type in the new numbers. That's a whole lot better to work with at times. If we wanted to make that picture smaller, you just open it up here. Maybe. There it goes. Open it up, and well, I have to zoom way out here. Can you also still see my screen?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, all the pictures disappeared on me for a moment. I didn't know where Zoom went. Okay. So with Microsoft Paint, it's a two-part process. We have to push Control A to select everything. Then we can resize the picture, and resize the background is two separate things. Whoops, undo that. So select all of it, resize the picture, and you can see down at the bottom there's some numbers. I don't know, I'll pick something like that. But then here it didn't change the background, so then we have to grab the background and move that in to match. How big is that if I go back to 100%? Yeah, and get sort of reasonable one, you know, about the size we want. Save a copy of this, maybe as Beach 2.
With Paint, is there any way you can have it so that it'll maintain aspect ratio?
Not with Paint. Well, there might be a checkbox. I was just using Microsoft Paint because that's a basic one that I think most people would probably have on their computer. With nicer software, yes. If you have anything nicer than just that super generic one that comes on everybody's computer.
Yeah, because the problem is you end up with a foreshortened image or something, unless you say, well, okay, it's about 7 to 10 on a ratio. So then you do math.
Yeah. Some of the ones that I normally use, you only have to type in the height or the width to change the height or the width, and then it preserves everything else. Most decent graphic software is going to do that. It's also going to give you the option of whether you want to do that or not. So without those height and width attributes, have that really big image, or we have that smaller one, that I just resized, kind of fits on the page. But if I come in here and resize the page, it doesn't necessarily change with that page, right? It's just a new fixed size. Whoops. So that's where the picture element comes in, because it gives us a way to have different versions depending on the size, right? If we had this in full screen or half the screen or a quarter, we might want a different size picture so that it fits with different layouts. which I think we see next week. It might be the week after next when we start really looking at different layouts and how we switch those up for different types of devices and things like that. This one's probably not going to change much, but if I hit F12 and go in here, this button right here, if you're on Google Chrome, the second button will allow us to see what it looks like on other devices. So that's what it looks like on a Pixel 2 phone. The same HTML running on an iPhone or an iPad. There's not really much going on here, so there's not much difference, but we can still see slight differences in the layout, not just the size, the space between the words and the image. And as more and more things end up on the page, we see more and more of that. But that's still sort of a future concern. When we have different devices, or even just on the same device, changing the screen size, we might want the picture to change. That's why they kind of replaced the image tag with this new one. We have this picture tag that'll have an open and closing value. And then inside of that, like, we load the picture tag up with different sources. So we'll have a source tag, and there's two things we need at source. The media attribute tells us when to do that. So I'll do a max min width. So if the media is a min width of 1200 pixels. Is that what I wanted? Yeah, I think so. And then instead of a source, we use what's called a source set. SRC and then set. Because when we use these type of tags, there's more than one of them. We'll see others later. We have a collection of source images. So we're only going to show this first picture, if it's bigger than 1200 pixels. So I'll use the original one for that. So that'll be the beach.jpg. And then finish out that source tag, which I did turn word wrap on apparently. Usually we kind of just go put all the code in one line. So if it's bigger than 1200 pixels, put in that one. And I'm gonna go ahead and type this next one in. Maybe min width of 800 pixels. Then for the source set, use that smaller one. Equals beach2.jpg. And we can keep going like this. So maybe a smaller one. Let's see if I select everything, make that really small. And then save that. Save another copy as a third one. beach3.jpg. I'll go ahead and put it in as the image tag. And then we'll set up a long list of things like that. and then put an image tag as a fallback. So first off, it's going to look and see if it's bigger than 1200 pixels. Then it's going to look and see if it's bigger than 800 pixels. Then it's going to look, if it's bigger than 1200 pixels, it's going to show the big picture. In that next range, it'll show that middle-sized one. And if neither one of those gets shown, then it'll fall back and show that just basic image tag. So like if I maximize it, oh, whoops, I have to reload it. So when it's fully sized, it's more than 1200 pixels wide here on my screen. So it's showing that big one. But if I, then when it's really small like that, it's showing the smallest image. I think there's one more in between those two. Yeah, so then there's the middle one, and then at a certain width, it's going to jump up and show the biggest one. Oh, I ran out of room. Oh no, we're 12. Yeah, there's 1200. So depending on the size of the browser window, it shows a different image. Whoops. Put that on the left and then that on the right. Does that make sense? Everybody see what's going on there? And then what you'll want to make several pictures. Well, you'll find the picture you want and make several copies. And it's usually best to start with a really big picture and make smaller copies. Because if you start with a small picture and try to make bigger copies, they get a little blurry very quickly. And one other thing that I'll show about this. Are there any questions on that so far? Okay, I assume not then. If I change this to max width, is that going to behave the same? Do I need to make any changes? Anybody have any thoughts on it? Are they in the right order now? So when it said minimum width, the first thing it checked was to see if it's bigger than 1200, right? And then the next thing it checked was to see if it's bigger than 800. So if let me see what's in the chat room.
What's wrong?
Yeah, what Isaac said, Isaac put in the chat room. But now that's backwards. It's going to go in order and look for those maximum. It's going to look for the maximum width. So maximum width, that means if it's smaller than 1200 pixels. So it's immediately going to go for that. So really this one should probably be kind of changed around. So if we're doing max width, we want to start at the smallest and get bigger. And if I hit Control Z to undo all those changes, so I get back to min width. And then if it's min width, you start with the biggest and get smaller. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't hear any responses, so I hope so. Because it's gonna go off the first one it finds.
Right.
So if we're looking for a minimum width, we want to start with our biggest one and say, if it's bigger than that, then go down. If it's bigger than that, or if it's bigger than that. But if we're going the other way, if it's smaller than that, or if it's smaller than that, or if it's smaller than that, otherwise the first one's going to trigger everything. So you have to watch the order on those. And then the image.
Yeah, if it says image source, if that's the first one in your list, it's just going to hit that and stop, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you always want to put the source sets first, because that's the new improved thing. And you can have lots and lots of them. I only did 2 for the example here, but we could keep going and going and going with that. the reason, and the reason we need to put a just regular old image tag in there is because of backward compatibility. Some people are still using really old browsers, right? I'm sure most people know at least one person that has a computer they've had for 10 years or more. And probably still running that, if they've had it for 10 years, probably still running the Internet Explorer version that came on that computer 10 years ago. So 10 years ago was before HTML5. And this tag was a couple updates into HTML5. So their browser wouldn't know what to do with that. So it would ignore the picture and the source tags. And then once it saw the image tag, it would know what to do with it. So we have to include that last one for backward compatibility. So that's, most people just kind of go ahead and throw that in the pattern somewhere. If you look at official like the W3 school site, the official standard set, when they're doing it, they'll do the source tags all the way down and just throw that in afterwards. But you can go ahead and include something on your selection list that way. But there's a number of things like that. Audio and video quality is another one, is put in video quality that way, so that you can choose between the quality of the video being streamed. But we'll start with the picture one for now, and we'll see more of those later. And then this is something we'll see more of later too, the media query, where we make selections based off the size of the browser. We have different things happen depending on what is going on at the client computer after our web page transmits. Anything else about those? Okay, yeah, so just a quick note about images. Then along with that, we have some other little, I guess what I was trying to introduce earlier, the little things to flare up our site, make it look a little bit better. Add borders and shadows and things like that. So what time is it? 2:09. So why don't we look at the other stuff after a break? Because we've been at this for over an hour now, right? So why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we'll look at the things like the shadows and yeah, borders and shadows are the main ones, and other things kind of follow the same patterns. Right? In a classroom, there's not time to go through an exhaustive list of CSS. So we just kind of have to look at exemplary things and get an idea of what it is. Now, when we see the other things, we know they'll follow the same pattern of the stuff we do know. But we'll take a look at that after a break. So let's take 10 minutes and meet back here at 2:20. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yep, sounds good.
All right. Well, I will see you all in a few minutes. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. So stop the recording.